Verse 1 reads, "This Atmabodha is composed for those whose sins are removed by austerities, who are calm, free from desires, and yearning for liberation." So this first verse is enumerating the qualities necessary for an ideal student. So after we have assessed and understood these qualities, we might not bother going through to verse 2, because when we understand what these qualities are, we recognize that we are simply not qualified. And in fact, it's an interesting verse, because when you look at the qualities of an ideal student, that student no longer needs the guidance of the text. It's only those who lack these qualifications that actually need the guidance. So those qualified don't need the text, and those who need the text aren't qualified to read it. That's if we look at this first verse in a very particular way. It's simply saying that to the extent we can attune to these different qualities, to that extent we will make ourselves more receptive to the content of the text. As we'll see when we analyze these qualities, when we practice them, the mind becomes more calm. In a calm mind, our reflection and contemplation, our analysis become more powerful. So this becomes the way that we can study this first verse. Understand the theory of each qualification, and then see what it means to turn it into a discipline that we can employ to help ourselves become more receptive to philosophical knowledge. And that wouldn't just be for this particular text. If we practice these 4 qualities and have a desire to understand these philosophical values of life, then we will become a student of every circumstance that we enter into. So then the old cliche says, life becomes our teacher in that regard. So the first of these qualities is annihilation of sins through the practice of austerities. So we want to cover 2 specific aspects here. One is the word sin, and the other is the word austerities. So when it comes to the word sin, most of us find it difficult to get away from the sort of culturally religious definition of sin as being embodied in a particular action. So we hear, for example, that it is a sin to kill, it is a sin to lie, etc. Vedanta philosophy says something quite different. Vedanta philosophy states that the word sin does not refer to the quality of an action per se, but rather sin refers to the emotional or to the mental effects of having performed that action. So if I perform an action and then later on the performance of that action results in some sort of mental agitation for me, those mental agitations are termed sin. So sin is not in the action, sin is in the reaction. The question is, what are those sorts of actions that result in this sort of residue, this sort of mental agitation? Anytime we act against our own conscience, we will incur sin. The next question is, why do we act against our conscience? The simple answer is that our own egocentric personal demands cloud our better judgment or cloud our wisdom. This word wisdom, one of the ways we can understand it is the capacity in us to make good choices, to live well. So when we come to understand what that means, we would recognize that a wise person has the capacity to rise above their own personal demands and do what is best for the total situation. If my personal demands are too strong, then my wisdom is clouded and I make choices that I may later regret. So the antidote to this is given as austerities. So this word austerities or tapas in Sanskrit has a particular connotation here. In the context, he's talking about at the physical level. So let's have a read through of the text and see how he describes it. The austerities referred herein envisage 2 types of discipline at the physical level. The negative aspect of the discipline is to prevent sensual dissipation by exercising self-control. The positive aspect is to utilize the conserved energy for reaching higher ideals in life. When we contact the sense objects, there is a dissipation of our energy. We take that conserved energy and instead redirect it to our higher ideals. This is the practice of tapas. So when we function in this way, what's happening is that we are practicing intelligent self-control. So this becomes part of the analysis. What is it that I enjoy at the level of my physical contacts that I enjoy beyond the point that I need? So let's take a simple example. You're at a friend's social event and she has made a beautiful chocolate cake from scratch. Towards the end of the dinner, she brings it out and presents it. So it's your obligation to take a piece of that cake and enjoy it, to honor all of her hard work and effort. Not only that, but you have a desire to eat chocolate cake. So this is a beautiful example of where obligation and desire match. It's your obligation to enjoy the food and you desire to do so also. But what happens after you've finished that first piece of chocolate cake? And the mind says, go and have another piece, or a third piece, or a fourth piece, or a fifth piece. As you extend it out, it becomes obvious that beyond a certain point, you're no longer functioning on your obligation to your friend. Now you're functioning on personal interest, greed, gluttony. So if I want to practice self-control, I recognize I don't need at least the third piece of chocolate cake. So I will restrain from that. As I do that, that energy that would have been dissipated through that excessive use is conserved, and I can also take that towards my higher ideals. Importantly here, what's happening is that I am avoiding performing an action that my own conscience would say, don't bother doing it. There'll be reasons why you should not have it. So by intelligently practicing self-control here, I avoid an action that goes against my conscience. As a consequence, I do not incur mental agitations or sin.